So welcome. Yeah, we're doing a session on using donor eggs. Now, the session was titled "Coming to Terms with Using Donor Eggs," and just sort of change it slightly. I think the coming to terms is around not being able to use your own eggs, and that the using of donor eggs should be framed perhaps more positively. You want to feel that that's a good plan B for you. So I think the coming to terms, I'm going to be interested in whether that's reflected by what the panel feel, but certainly in our organisation at the Donor Conception Network, the difficult process is the letting go of what couldn't be, the child that you thought you were going to have that isn't going to arrive, but also at the same time opening to the possibility of the child that can be, which is a different child, and hopefully has like I said, a sort of positive, as a positive plan B rather than feeling it so negative. So I'm going to start off by just getting the panel to introduce themselves and do a quick summary of their situation, their background, not spending too long on the sort of treatment and background, but just sort of to put a context to why you ended up using donor egg and where you are in terms of the family journey. Have you got children and how old they are, just so that, again, we can have a context for the conversation. So you happy to work with that?
Hi, I'm Angelo DePaul. I have a 5-year-old son, and he was born in the US for a surrogacy arrangement. And we used donor eggs. We didn't have any choice at the time. My wife couldn't have children. So for us, it was a relatively simple choice. There was no other option. It was the last option that we had, and we didn't have an issue with that at all. It seemed like a fantastic choice and a very lucky one to have. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Charlotte. I had 2 NHS IVF attempts, which both failed, and then decided to move on to donor egg because I thought it would be a fast process. Lol. 3 years and a pandemic later, I was on attempt number 14. I am now 22 weeks pregnant with a donor egg.
Hi, I'm Katie. I have kind of a 10-year story, so yeah, there's always a bit of a length to it, with some sad loss. My first IVF successful pregnancy after a few attempts ended sadly in the stillbirth of my daughter about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. I then switched to donor eggs after another failed attempt, and then miscarried my first donor attempt, but I have an 8-month-old daughter at home, born in July last year, who is thriving and fantastic and everything you want to come out of this process. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thanks, that's really helpful. So, we've got three success stories in front of us, which is always very, very, I think, very positive and hopeful for those who are at the early stages of just working out if this is the right route for them. So going back to my original reframing of the question, it sounds like for certainly for you and your wife, Angelo, it wasn't a difficult decision at all to move from your own eggs to donor eggs, and I'm just wondering whether that's true for all of you, and whether you could talk a little bit about that process. Why, if it was easy, why you think it was why it felt so easy, if it was partly. If there were difficulties and things that you needed to think over to get to the point where you could be so positive about it, what helped? What was that process like?
I think it's very personal, and how you come to terms with it. With my wife, she was raised by her auntie and uncle when her mother died when she was young. So to have the love for a child that wasn't biologically hers was fairly easy. She never saw that as a particular issue, and I think that helped a lot. I think also, the fact that we wanted to have a child so much, it meant meant everything. And okay, it's not biologically my wife's, but she's the mother of him, and there's no question of any issues there. So the fact it's not biologically related wasn't really an issue. I think we just got past it very quickly. We wanted the child, so that was the main consideration. I can imagine why it would be difficult for some people, that initial hurdle, but I think the greater need triumphed over that. Yeah.
Thank you. What about you, Charlotte?
It sounds like lots of these is just very pragmatic. It's that you don't really have an option. I would also have really liked to buy a 6-bedroom house in Dulwich when I could have afforded to, and it doesn't mean I'd rather be homeless than have my small flat. I think there's a part of me, number one, I think because I'm carrying the child, I do feel like I'm a biological parent, even though epigenetics and all of the complexities, I think you have that link. I also, maybe this is the anti-narcissist, it's going to look like my partner, and it's not going to have my worst bits, which is quite nice. It hopefully won't annoy me as much as some of my nieces do when they have the same temper tantrums that I did, or do you know what I mean? And that's quite exciting, is that I literally have no idea what this child will be like. And it's one of the reasons I'm quite glad that I had an anonymous donor. I literally know nothing other than she looks a bit like me and she was 26, because I can't project that onto the child. I can only recognise mannerisms from myself or my family or the unknown ones, which is quite exciting.
I think exciting's a great way of looking at it. I totally agree. When you get to a point where that's the decision you've got to make, it just makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then maybe it isn't the right route for you and you need to have a look at some other routes. But there are difficulties and there are emotional challenges and there are physical challenges through the IVF process, which are hard. When you've been through that already, donor conception actually feels quite easy because someone else does the first bit. For me, one of the things I did find quite difficult was I come from a family where our narrative is how alike we all are. So I've got identical twin uncles. They look a lot like my grandfather did. My cousin, who never even met my grandfather, carries, because he passed away before he was born, but he carries quite a lot of his mannerisms and movements. And so there's this really strong genetic identity on my mother's side. And that took a while for me to come to terms with the fact that I knew I was never going to look at a face that I recognised coming back at me. But now she's here, actually, it's so insignificant now she's here. And I'm really sorry, but you do see yourself coming back at you. She's 8 months old, but already, her facial expressions are... I can kind of see some of my mannerisms coming back at me, and they're not always the good ones. And that's lovely. But that for me was the biggest challenge to come to terms with that sort of genetic narrative of facial similarity. But it's so insignificant once the baby's here and safe and well and happy that actually I rarely think about it now. I do. Interestingly, she doesn't really look like that much like her father either. She's got kind of some of his length and there are some similarities. So it is interesting and exciting watching this kind of human grow and what she will be like. So I think, exciting is a great way of looking at it.
Thank you. And in terms of choosing the donor, so Charlotte, for you, it was a very easy decision to go straight to an anonymous donor, and that felt like a positive option. I'm just wondering whether the same is, what your decision-making process was like. Do you know anything about the donor? Was that important to you? Were there things you'd have liked that were not on offer, not available in terms of the donor choice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ideally, it would be somebody that you could talk to and interview, and I mean, it's one of the most important decisions of your life. But you don't get that choice, and most of them are. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I mean, when we had, it was mostly anonymous. There were some that were potentially open to it, but the vast majority was anonymous. And the biggest issue was the huge amount of demand. So you could make all the best choices in the world, but then they suddenly become unavailable, or the IVF doctor does the review and they're not unavailable. So it was a lengthy process. It took a few months. It was quite difficult because there was a lot of demand. Ideally, we would have known her, but we didn't. It was purely
what
anonymous.
Information do you have? Do you have any, or is it?
Yeah, we've got quite a lot. I mean, we used different agencies. We contacted about half a dozen different donor agencies because of the amount of the demand, and we wanted somebody who was experienced. That was critical, and experienced. They'd had successful pregnancies before with their eggs. I mean, for us, that eliminated a huge amount of risk in pregnancy. So that was absolutely important, and we wanted blonde hair, blue eyes, like my wife. So again, that was kind of that ended up being quite high demand for that sort of donor. Yeah, we would have liked to have interviewed them, but yeah, it didn't happen. It just ended up being a very long process. When we did choose the donor, and that was the donor we used in the end, we did ask whether or not we could contact her in the future. She said she was open to that. And I did ask if I could meet her via the agency, and after I'd chosen her, though, and I did, and it was quite an interesting experience, to put it mildly. Yeah.
Okay, so you met her after you'd
chosen her. Ideally, it would have been the other way around, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But so she is a sort of a real person in that way in your circle. I mean, very wide circle. But
we got a lot of information about her family and history, everything. There's an awful lot of information provided. Yeah. But it was anonymous. I don't know her name, her full name.
Thank you. And what about you, Katie?
That's just blown my mind a bit. Because I don't think I would want to have a person. So all my IVF treatment up until the point of having switching to donor eggs was through London Women's Clinic. And they're linked to the London Egg Bank. And so I kind of just stayed in that system. I think by that point we'd been through so much, I needed some consistency. And it's such a weird process, so weird. I mean, it is literally like internet dating, going through all of these donor profiles, and that's hard because, like you say, it's such an enormous decision. But basically, you're just looking at words on a computer screen. But the thing that really worked for me was the donor that I chose had written a letter. Lots of the profiles had little bits of information, and some of them had letters to any subsequent children. But this donor had just written the most incredible letter. And I'd spent quite a few weeks looking through the donor list and sort of putting in the like brown hair, brown eyes, like all of the kind of things. But then just one morning, this lady popped up, and I read the letter, and she had 4 children of her own, which, as you say, kind of makes you feel quite comfortable, although it also then makes you think, well, my child would have half siblings, and that's something to consider. But this letter to the child was just so unbelievable, and it basically said, I have thought about the fact that you may want to contact me, and I'm open to that, but I want you to know that your parents will have made some really difficult decisions to get to this point of deciding to use donor eggs. And the fact that they've done that, you only get one chance of a family. They love you very much. I'm here if you want to come and find me, but your parents are your parents. And that just blew my mind, that she was thinking that far ahead already. And what a special person to be able to do that, not only to give her eggs, but to be able to think about the fact that, you know, what somebody might have been through to get to that stage. And it just sealed the deal for me. And she was, you know, instantly, and I showed my husband, and he was like, just buy them before someone else does. It was a really quick decision. And actually then when I properly sort of contacted the clinic that morning, and the lady came back and was like, actually, she's a really good physical match for you as well. So it just, everything felt right. And I've got that letter, and I will always be able to give it to my daughter, to be able to say, you know, this is how special the lady was that helped you come to be. So that was once I'd found that, but I don't think I want to look her in the eye just yet anyway. I'm not quite ready for that.
Do you know, though, just to add, so the part of the reason why I had to have anonymous is because I couldn't use anyone in the UK. I have problems with frozen eggs and timings, so I needed fresh, which meant I had to go abroad. And actually, my first few goes at donor was in Prague, and I remember thinking, if I sit in a coffee shop outside for long enough, I might be able to see who it is. And I was going through all of this in my head, trying to work out whether I would want to know or whether it would taint it. But I also think anyone who goes into this not thinking about things like 23andMe, like, the reality is they whether or not they choose to engage with or grow a relationship with that person, it's not going to be anonymous. I mean, it's completely going to be open by then.
So just to clarify what that all meant, in case that last bit wasn't clear to people. So what's happening at the moment, because of the popularity of home DNA testing kits, lots of people are submitting their DNA to, you know, I don't know, find out about perhaps their heritage, perhaps see if they've got any distant cousins somewhere around the world. And what they're actually discovering is a parent unexpected. So it could be someone who's adopted or was the product of an affair, but it also can be donor-conceived people who didn't know they were donor-conceived, who will put their DNA online and discover that actually their father or their mother is not their genetic father or their mother for whatever reason. And so the upside, I guess, of that opportunity means that for those who want to connect, who weren't allowed or aren't allowed, you know, that isn't the framework that they're donating in, that there is that possibility that in the future, that's very likely that anyone who is donor conceived through egg or sperm donation will firstly know that. They'll know that their parents are not their genetic parents. And then secondly, that they are likely to be able to find their genetic family, whether that's the donor or the donor's relatives. So that's what the 2023, the 23andMe reference was, which is quite right. I mean, I think going back to what you were talking about, Katie, I mean, the advantage of places where the donors are aware of this possibility, and that's built into the legal framework of how they donate and when they donate, is they get counselling. So they know that this is a possibility and they're agreeing to it. And that may be, you know, quite helpful, I think, in the future. I think it's going to be difficult. We know that donors that have been traced this way can struggle sometimes. They were promised anonymity and then they are exposed unintentionally. So, you know, perhaps a bit of an awareness raising program wouldn't be a bad thing to let people know that this is an option and could well happen. So yes, three very different scenarios actually in terms of the donor, and I'm wondering whether, you know, you've all got young children. I'm guessing, yes, exactly. Yeah, not quite here yet even. I'm just wondering whether you've sort of thought about how you're going to talk about this with them, with friends and family. Presumably, Angela, you've already started some kind of conversation with maybe some friends and family. Maybe you've started talking with your child. I don't know.
Oh, no, I mean, well before he was born, we talked about it with all the family and friends and told them all. That was pretty important for us to do, and get them on board with what we were doing and understanding.
What kind of responses did you get?
Good, I think, very, very good. I think people never thought we were going to have children, so they're incredibly happy. When we thought they'd be very surprised, or perhaps not think it was a good thing to do. I don't know. It seemed at the time it seemed such an odd thing to do. Surrogacy is an extremely complicated thing to do, as opposed to the sort of the natural way to do things. It's difficult to explain to anybody. So yeah, we expected perhaps some negative responses. We didn't get any. It was overwhelmingly positive, very, very positive. It was.
And in terms of the sort of telling and talking side of things, so talking with your son, is it such?
Yeah, my son. Well, we started, I think, very early. We bought a whole load of books that are dedicated to surrogacy or whatever, having children in the way we did. And there's lots of books out there that you can get, and so we ordered them all. And some very young, some a bit older, and we made sure we were prepared for that. And I started talking to him very early, from like 2 onwards, when he started to understand and talk about our surrogates, talk about how Jessica, how she carried you, and showing him pictures of her with him in his tummy, so that he's sort of growing up very, very slowly over the years with that picture in his head, and that understanding, and some of the books. So you're telling it like a children's story that eventually one day he'll actually truly understand, and suddenly he'll just think, oh yeah, I know about that. That's me, yeah. So I think to start early and keep it for yourself as well, because it's a difficult thing to talk about. You find it a little difficult to talk to your child about. I do anyway, and the more you talk about it, the easier it is for you, and the easier it certainly is for him. So I think just do it frequently and often, and start early. You certainly don't want it to be a surprise when he gets older.
Well, that is totally on message. I didn't pay him to say any of that stuff, and yes, that's certainly, So our charity, the Donor Conception Network, we've been supporting families who are using sperm or egg donors for nearly 30 years. It's our 30th anniversary next year, and a big core value of the organisation is openness and honesty in the family. And so yes, and that would be our message is start early and build your confidence, particularly before a child really really understands what you're telling them, because the advantage of that is they're not going to ask you an awkward question, or certainly not until you've built up a bit of a confidence with that story. How do you want to explain this, and what words are you going to use? And the first few times, I don't know whether it's true for you, but certainly for a lot of our members, the first times that they say it out loud, it can be very emotional. Because, of course, for them, it just brings back all the long history of perhaps failed treatments and disappointments, and the fact that this is perhaps, a plan B. It reminds them of their plan A that wasn't to be. And so getting all of that out the way with a 2-year-old who's not going to pay any attention is much easier than trying to face that with a 10-year-old who's, watching your every word and really picking up on your body language and tone. And so, by the time you've got a child of 10 who's perhaps going to ask an awkward question, you're ready, you're confident. But yes, I don't know whether you've obviously got. You're a bit, yes, you've got a bit of time to go. But Katie, are you thinking about that?
Absolutely, it starts so early. So even, and I don't know whether you've had any questions yet, but even in my medical appointments in the run-up to the baby being born, you're being asked questions like, do you have a history of heart disease? Well, it's totally irrelevant whether I've got a history of heart disease. So you do have to cover it, and you get quite used to it. You get quite used to sort of saying these things or answering these questions, and people see what they want to see all the time. And in the 8 months since my daughter was born, countless people have told me she looks like me. She looks nothing like me. She cannot look like me. But people just say it, and they're saying it to be nice. So you do have to sort of take a deep breath, and you decide whether you're going to say at that point, well, actually, she can't, and that depends on who you're talking to. But I think the narrative for me will be that she's been born from two parents who absolutely love her unbelievably, and this incredible woman who helped us, and she's a product of the three of us. And actually, just a little while ago, on my way here, I popped into a shop, and there was a book there for Easter. It's called The Happy Egg, and I saw it and I was like, actually, that's perfect. It's got nothing to do with donation at all. It's just about an egg. But I thought, well, that's a really nice kind of, let's get eggs into our family story. And I read to her every night, so let's talk about the happy egg. And that's not a story just for Easter. I'll read it to her tonight, and we'll start talking about it. She's not going to care tonight. Just hope she sleeps. But you. I think it's just always going to be part of our narrative. And, you take her for her first haircut, the hairdresser's going to say, oh, she got her hair colour from you. There are all the times where it's going to crop up. So you just need to be prepared, I think. And I don't want her to see me struggle with it. So I need to get used to it now.
Yes, and I think going back to my original point about the title of the session being coming to terms with donor egg, and actually maybe that's a wrong framing of it, yes, to get yourself, ideally, for those of you who haven't had children yet, to get yourself into a position, which may take a bit of time, particularly if you're moving from your own eggs to donor eggs. In our experience, it for some people, it can take a long time to feel whether this is really right for you or not. And the advantage of putting the time in and getting to that confident space is that when you move forward, you can answer these questions and deal with these situations without being phased. You're ready for them, and that will have only a beneficial effect for your child, for your relationship, for your family, for your wider circle. So it's a good investment, and yes, because those questions come very, very early. So either medical questions, but also we know that a lot of our families get quizzed about the looking like and not looking like the family starts very early. And so, again, that can be quite triggering if you're getting people, you've got a 2-year-old with very curly hair, and people are constantly, oh, where does she get her curly hair from? None of you lot have curly hair. They're just asking an innocent question, curious. But for you, it can feel like a stab in the heart that, yes, okay, she must have got her curly hair from the donor, and I didn't really want to use it. You need to get all of that sort of sorted, ideally, as much as possible before moving forward. But any last tips? I know time is almost there. One last sentence from anyone on sort of advice to people who are thinking about going. Is that too much? Too much?
No, I'm sure there's something.
What would you say to yourself if you went back 3 years or 6-7 years perhaps? What would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now?
I think I would have. Just do it, because all my hopes and fears. All my fears are gone and all my hopes have come true. So I have my daughter. It's tough. It's really tough. And you will face some difficult decisions and some, depending on your circumstances. But getting to take your baby home is the most wonderful feeling. So just find a way to make it happen for you, I think.
Got so much going through my head. I'm like, I think I completely agree in terms of all of the things I worried about, all of the tests I wanted and the stuff I wanted. Now I'm pregnant, it just has melted away. I do think the conversation and the normalising of the conversation is the only thing that's going to make this easier for people to understand, and also easier to find donors, especially in this country, which is a real issue. But I think all in all, when you know that you're ready to have a baby, it should feel like an easy decision.
Yeah, I think the only advice I'd have is, definitely go do it, but be prepared and talk to people, get references, do as much. You can never be unprepared. You can never do too much research. That's the one piece of advice. And make sure you ask all the difficult questions up front, especially if you're doing surrogacy. It becomes infinitely more complicated when you're doing surrogacy, especially abroad. So ask the difficult questions and make sure you get that research done and get good support from good agencies, and make sure you do research. Yeah.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much.
I hope you all thank me for such a wonderful panel.